All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Rice Crypto Show. I am your host, Rice Crypto, and today I am joined by Lynette Zang, who's with ITM Trading. Now, if this is your first time ever checking out any of my content, I encourage you, please check out my other content. Also, make sure you're checking out the first interview that I did with Lynette. We cover a lot of information. We're not going to be recapping that information in this interview, so I encourage you, check out the first interview that I did with Lynette. Also, give thumbs up, like, subscribe. It helps other people to be able to see this information in the YouTube flow. So Lynette Zang is with ITM Trading. She's the chief market analyst there. She's been there since 2002. She's been a banker, a stockbroker, and studied economics since 1987, and has been into the currency world since the mid-60s, roughly. And her motto is food, water, energy, security, community, barterability, and wealth preservation. Lynette Zang, thank you again for joining us. How are you doing today?
Well, I'm very happy to be here, so thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the economy. And like last we spoke, it's been a couple months and a lot's been going on. And one of the things that we talked about in that first interview was the fact that we see the US dollar crashing, which will obviously cause a global domino effect. And there's been a lot of things happening over the past couple months that are leading us more into that direction. So I'd like to talk to you about some of the things that are leading us there, and maybe you can explain some things to people that don't necessarily understand what's going on or just pay attention to the mainstream media.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of it is about perception management to guide how you think about things. So if you're listening to the talking heads and they'll say, oh, the dollar, which against other currencies has been strong, and yet in April, officially, according to the Federal Reserve, in terms of value, purchasing power value, what you can buy with that dollar, it actually, for the first time ever, broke below 4 cents per dollar out of the original dollar.
Wow.
So, yeah, that's not really good. Going up against other currencies is just fiat currency to fiat currency. In other words, government-based currency against government-based currency. And unless you're traveling, that doesn't really matter. What matters is what you can convert those dollars into. And now, officially, less than 4 cents.
That is insane. And the crazy thing is they act like right now our economy is doing well and that we're in a good position. I mean, that's at least what the mainstream media is reporting to the general public.
Oh, absolutely. And this morning, I was listening to the new Fed chair, Powell, and he was saying that they wouldn't really claim that they have licked inflation. Well, I have to tell you, a statement like that, frankly, really makes me angry. Because by design, inflation is not a monetary phenomenon. It is a fiat money, a government money phenomenon.
Right.
And by design, inflation is in there, which is why we now have, less than 4 cents in value, in purchasing power value in that dollar. The Fed's job is to regulate the speed and the rate of inflation. And that's why they have this 2% inflation target. Because if they can reduce the value of the dollar by 2% a year, you don't notice it, but that's like an invisible tax on you.
Right. It's an invisible tax. And then people who are saving their money, they're obviously having a devaluation of what they're saving. So they could have bought more at the time they started saving than they would versus saving it for a year and using that money. And it's insane, but definitely doing it slowly like you're talking about makes people not notice it more.
Exactly.
But I think that it's all starting to come to a head too, because it doesn't look like they're not able to control it the way that they've been able to in the past.
Right, and that's because when the market plunged in 2008, that is a very deflationary phenomenon. When markets go down, that's a deflationary phenomenon. And what they had to do, there's only one way to fight that, and that's with inflation. So all of that quantitative easing, that easy money policies, those 0% interest rates, were all about reflating. Some of your viewers may have heard the reflation trade because they talked about it all the time on mainstream media, to try and boost those instruments, which is really what they are, up, so that you wouldn't realize that the system really died in 2008. And it's despicable because we now have the most expensive stock market in history. The bond market, not as much because they've been raising rates, so principal has dropped. But when you're looking at the stock market, what you see is the stock market going up, and that's supposed to tell you that everything is just fine. But what it's really all about, this just came out yesterday, actually. Let's see, his name was Robert Jackson. He's an SEC commissioner, and in his speech, he was talking about financial engineering and how corporations buying back their stocks have basically hidden the insiders. So, and I'm talking about the corporate insiders, the boards of directors, the CEOs, the CFOs, but the corporations buying back their stock has hidden the insiders selling tons of stock and taking that off the table. Now,
right.
That's what I talk about every week.
That's, I mean, when people that's just crazy to think about, and it's insane that, I mean, there's just a select few amount of people who really pay attention and care about this. And it's I don't get how the general public hasn't caught on to this. And that's definitely something that I try to do with this channel. And I know that you try to do, is to wake people up to the realities of what's actually happening.
Well, you stop and think about it. They have really degraded our food supply so that the food that most people eat has little to no value. And not only that, but it also hurts you. So it dulls your thought process.
Right.
Plus, as the value of the dollar has gone down, people have to work a whole lot more and they take on a whole lot more debt too, just to try and sustain a living standard. So people are busy, so they can't think clearly, and they're busy, so they're not paying attention. And they think, oh, well, I don't really understand that anyway. Well, you don't understand it by design. I mean, that's the thing. It's all by design. That's the part that makes me the most angry, really.
And speaking of food thing, I mean, that's kind of why you do your growing and stuff like that as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it really, I've been paying attention to the quality of my food for quite some time, thanks to my sister, Beth Ellen, who always bugged me, read the label, read the label. But once Big Pharma caught on to the fact that people were actually willing to pay more for organic or cleaner product, then they started buying up those smaller companies, and they also changed the rules on what defines organic, defines this, defines that.
Right.
So I will say that the reason why I started my urban farm was because of all of my research that I've done on currency life cycles and repeatable patterns. And I absolutely 100% know, and you can look at Venezuela, you can look anywhere in South America right now, pretty much Brazil, Argentina, etc., and you'll see food becomes the biggest issue for people. And if you're dependent on the government for food, you're probably not in a real good position. So that is actually the real reason why I started the farm. But the secondary reason is because of the quality of food. I know the water because it's all filtered. I know the fertilizer. I know how it's cared for. I mean, and I go out and pick it and eat it. So it's as fresh and clean as it can possibly be, because I got to keep this brain functioning optimally.
Right. I mean, and we're talking about economic crashes and global disasters as far as economies and things like that, and nobody would think that food and stuff would come into play, and how complex
Oh my God.
this entire plan is, you know. And it's like, not to be like a conspiracy theorist, I mean, but to be a realist. I mean, when you
Right.
actually pay attention and start thinking for yourself, using critical thinking, and start researching and not listening to what you're being told and what you've been conditioned and taught, then you start seeing things for how they truly are. You know, and that's one of the things I really appreciate about you. You keep it real. You don't try to whitewash it. You don't try to make it sound better than it is. You don't try to make it sound worse than it is. You let people know exactly how it is. And that's what people need to hear.
Well, you know, if you believe, and I believe you do, think like I do, it's in everybody's best interest to make educated choices. And I can really thank my father, because growing up, and he was a great man, so I don't want anybody to take this the wrong way. I had a very close relationship with him. But he would always say to me, do as I say and not as I do. And I would always say, Daddy, that doesn't make any sense to me. And so it's almost like he prepped me for it. So yeah, I listen to what they say, but then I go just a little underneath. I mean, this is all publicly available. I go a little underneath and I look at what they do. Do their actions support their words? Well, okay, then it must be true, because that's integrity. But most of the time what I find is that their actions do not support their words.
Right.
All you have to do is look at how much gold they've been accumulating since the crisis and ask why. I mean, Russia has surpassed China now in gold accumulation. Not that we would really have the opportunity to actually know how much gold China has been accumulating, because none of what they mine comes out of that country. And, you know, and they're not necessarily so forthcoming. However, they've been massively accumulating gold, because the whole function of gold is really wealth protection.
Right. That's what I was going to ask you. So, I mean, why is China and Russia accumulating so much gold? Like, what's going on that you know, that other people may not be aware of?
Well, there's a shift in power from the West to the East, but that can only properly shift if there's savings. I mean, think about this, because it really doesn't matter whether you're a country or a government or a corporation or an individual. The laws of economics works for everybody. So if you're just going along and you have a problem and you need money, like most people can't come up with $500 in an emergency, they have no savings. Everything's been done on debt and credit, well, you're in trouble. But if you have savings and you need $500 or whatever, okay, you have savings, you pull it from there. So for governments, it's the same thing. For central banks, they're accumulating gold because they know that in this next crisis, what's going to happen is all of this fiat money wealth, which is really just based on financial engineering, they admit it openly. Well, that's either going to be locked in the system. That wealth is either going to be locked in the system, or it's going to go away, or you're going to see both of it.
Right.
If they don't have the gold.
Sorry about that. We had some little technical difficulties, but we will go ahead and continue talking about the global economic crash, the crash of the U.S. dollar. One thing I wanted to ask you, Lynette, since you were talking about Russia and China, do you think that the BRICS Bank and China are working towards a kind of a mission of de-dollarization, per se?
Well, yes. And actually, they've been globally, that's been occurring for quite some time, because frankly, I mean, in 71, when Nixon took us off the gold standard, the de-dollarization, I mean, it was the petrodollar that retained our position as the world's reserve currency. But remember, the euro dollar was really created to compete with the US dollar in global trade, although no pegs actually work, and looks like that's, well, that is breaking down. It doesn't look like it is breaking down. it's doing it a little bit more slowly with Brexit and possibly with Italy. We'll have to see how this plays out. But,
I do want to talk about Italy and Brexit briefly, but
yep. Well, what I was going to say, though, it was already the end of 2002 was when the very first time that the Federal Reserve actually began to monetize U.S. government debt by buying treasuries. So in 2002, maybe the general population was not paying attention, didn't know that that was happening. But I would say globally, those that are in power knew that that process had begun. It just wasn't really advertised until 2009, and then it said to be like a great thing that they were buying back the debt. But what that really tells you is that there were not enough buyers of our debt, so that we had to start buying our own debt. That's not a good thing. That's what a third world country does. It's not what a developed nation does. So yeah, there is a shift from the East to the West to China that they have been slated to introduce the SDR and to bring in this new currency regime. Yeah, no doubt about it. And
we do talk about the SDR thing in the last interview. So again, if you haven't checked that out, I definitely encourage you to check that out.
Yeah, I actually have done quite a bit of work on the SDR on our YouTube as well, so you can go more deeply into that.
That's kind of how I discovered it more, was you talking about that. So like the AC chain.
Yeah.
So now the Chinese has introduced their petro yuan. What kind of threat? What kind of threat do you think that's going to give to the U.S. petrodollar?
Well, I think it's the final nail in the coffin, because now if you're buying oil, I mean, the advantage of being the world reserve currency is that globally all assets are valued in terms of dollars. So if you're a government or country going outside of your borders, you have to use dollars to buy, lumber, steel, oil, all of this stuff. But as we've been talking, that's been shifting, really since the crisis. It's really sped up quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And now, particularly with oil, since that was the mechanism that enabled us to retain that position, well, now you don't have to buy oil in terms of dollars. You can buy it in terms of yuan. It's a very big deal. And it's put in for that transition to take place. I mean, we have to agree to this shift. I think that's what they're attempting to do, is maybe a softer shift, but we have to agree to it, or it couldn't happen. We're too big and too powerful, but we've basically been giving that power away.
I agree. And it can't come down to military all the time.
Right.
I mean, that's been our big thing, is having the military to back up our dollar. I mean, they call it the petrodollar, but it's more like the military dollar, the U.S. military dollar, because that's the only thing that really backs up anything that we have, especially since Nixon's taken us off the gold standard.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are waking up to that reality, though, of like fiat money and how government is manipulating things. Italy is a great example.
Oh, yeah.
What are your thoughts about what's going on in Italy?
Well, look, it's not a big surprise, because over the years, a lot of pegs have been attempted. And what I mean by a peg is this currency tying directly to another currency so that they can enjoy the benefits of it. So quite frankly, when they created the petrodollar, and I mean, this has happened 100% of the time. So, I don't know why they thought this time would be different. I think that's insanity.
It is.
Right.
It's the actual definition.
Exactly. So, but when one currency pegs to another, then their monetary policy has to be the same, and it's based on the stronger one. So, I mean, come on, is Italy's economy the same as Germany's economy? Now, right, exactly. Right. No, it's not. It wasn't the same as Greece's economy either. So I'm afraid that Greece, because they're still stubbornly in the EU, but they've had at least 14 bouts of austerity where they've just imposed harsher and harsher levels of rules, etc., on the population, basically squeezing the life out of them. And unfortunately, I think we're going to see a similar thing in Italy, unless they break away from the European Union and go back to the lira or some form of the lira. I mean, it's just a name, so it doesn't really matter. And that's what the threat is right now. Just like Brexit was an indication that the population, seeing the income inequality, seeing all of the inequality, it's the public that has to deal with the austerity, not having, you know, I mean, gosh, I think there are teachers and firefighters, et cetera, in Greece that haven't had a paycheck in, you know, forever. I don't know why they're still working, but, you know, that's not just the only austerity, but I think people globally are really waking up to this income inequality piece. They've recognized who is too big to fail and who is just about the right size to fail, right?
Yeah.
And they're getting angry and they're rebelling. I mean, even in this country, by electing President Trump, you know, a reality star
right.
as president, right? I mean, that really was a populist movement. People are getting tired of this. So yeah, I think Italy, but the problem with Italy is they're sitting on the highest debt level of anybody in the whole European Union. And I think it's the fourth highest debt level in the world. And they've got, well, they've got a chunk of it that is coming due prior to the end of 2001. So all of that, they're going to have to roll. They can't pay it, right? When debt comes due, you either pay it, you roll it over, or you default on it. What else can you do with it, right? So they have all of this debt that's coming due, and interest rates are rising. In fact, they just, you know, the markets were freaking out because of Italy, and then magically they issued all of this debt and the markets calmed down. But what people really fail to understand is when they issued this debt, the interest that they're having to pay on this debt roughly quadrupled.
Yeah.
I mean, I want you to let that sink in for a second, the implications of that. So the cost of this debt is enormous. And the amount of debt that they have coming due after 2021 is actually even greater than what they have coming due up to this point. But the problem with that is that the IBOR's interbank offer rate, on which all of those contracts were written against, is going away the end of 2021 because it no longer functions. The interbank.
Yeah, I've heard you bring this up, and I was going to actually ask you about this because I know you said that if we don't see the crash of the dollar or an economic collapse globally before 2021, that this would be one of the things that would definitely tip it over.
Well, here's the problem. Yeah, I mean, and actually, you have to understand that anything can happen to trigger an event that they cannot overcome. But there is roughly 370 trillion, 100 trillion that are in debt and derivative contracts. Derivatives are just big bets that are written against the IBORs. And the IBORs are what a bank would charge or have to pay to loan or borrow overnight. And that used to be a very active market up until 2008. And at that point, it died. I mean, it was like a crash. So all of these contracts, now nobody really, I mean, I saw that, and I've been talking about the IBORs for a long time, but I'll be honest with you, I didn't really recognize how significant that crash really was. But it's because of all of the contracts that are written. So mortgages, credit cards, student loans, plus all other things, plus all of those big derivative bets. So it was not until, and they knew that the whole premise on which they based that rate was bogus, They knew it in 2009. The Bank of England was actually complicit in manipulating that rate, but somehow it got leaked to the public in 2012. Once it was leaked to the public, then they knew they couldn't maintain that writing contracts against it, though they have, because there's no other alternative that's been created. And so it got very, very quiet. I really didn't hear anything about the IBORs or LIBOR. LIBOR is just the London one where most of the contracts are written against. But last summer, the financial authority, England Central Bank, came out and said that they were no longer going to have, there's 18 banks that call up and say, well, in my opinion, the rate should be this, because there's no real market for it. So by the end of 2021, those banks are no longer going to be obligated to tell us what that rate is. The LIBOR is going away. So any contracts that mature after that date, all of those contracts must be they call it amended, but really means reset. For the retail public, well, there's language in all of your contracts, whether it's a credit card or a mortgage or whatever, that gives the lender the ability to change that. That is really what happens in to mortgages, et cetera, in a reset when we go into the hyperinflation as well. So that that language is in all of those contracts. But the real problem is, number one, they have to create a new benchmark. Well, they've begun to do that as of this year. London's come out with one. The U.S. has come out with one, and there are 3 other central banks that are coming out with them. They haven't come out with it yet. Then they have to create a market to accept this new benchmark. Right. I mean, this is a pretty tall order to do in a very short period of time. Then they have to, in many cases, this is according to the ISDA, which are all the big banks that write all this stuff. That's a self-regulatory body. But according to the ISDA, many of those derivative contracts, you have to get 100% agreement.
Wow.
Right. I mean, you know, these things are so complicated, they actually don't think that that's a possibility. This is what they're working on, though. So any misstep means it's game over. Because even Deutsche Bank, who is, according to the IMF, the most dangerous bank on the planet because of their derivative book and how interconnected they are to all of the other banks, they've had something like 7,000 regulatory filings and lawsuits against them. So what does that really mean?
Right, and they were just recently downgraded as far as their status.
Oh my gosh, well, I just did a thing recently on their financial statement. Their leverage ratio is 3.8%, which means that they borrowed $27 to generate $1 worth of equity. And that also means that if the value of their assets falls more than 3.8%, that they are insolvent. And according to that same financial report, the value of their assets in 2017 dropped 7%. So they are a zombie bank, and they're kept alive because they're so incestuously interconnected.
Well, yeah, I mean, if the Deutsche Bank was to collapse and become insolvent, then that would just cause a domino effect that nobody would be able to control.
Exactly.
And by keeping it on life support, we're at least keeping the system existing.
And they want to do that until they're ready to shift us into the new system. I mean, that's really what these last 10 years have been about. Just getting us ready, getting everything in place, and so things have really sped up. But with Deutsche Bank, they've got 52% of their debt. These are not their derivative contracts. The debt that they owe, 52% of that, and they've had losses for the last number of years, including 2017, in a one-way up market. But 52% of their contracts, come due prior to 2021. So again, they either have to pay them, or they have to roll them over, or they have to default on them, and it's coming due in a rising interest rate environment, which puts greater hardship on them. But 48% of them have to be amended.
Right.
This is an accident waiting to happen.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
You know?
I agree. And last time we talked about Venezuela as an example of kind of like what people can look at as the future.
Yep. Now you can also look at Argentina, and you can look at Brazil. You know, I mean, this is spreading globally. It is. It's spreading.
So do you still think that this is like what's going on in those countries currently that we're going to face here in the United States?
Oh, 100%. The debt, it's real simple. The debt is not payable at these levels. Now, inflation benefits debtors because you end up, you know, in this country, I mean, think about it. You end up with more dollars, right? That's that
Right.
wage inflation. If that's that inflation. So if you bought a house 20 years ago and your payments were kind of a stretch when you did it, but you've gotten raises all along the way, even though they have not kept pace with inflation, still it makes that mortgage payment easier to pay because you have more dollars to work with.
Right.
Okay? So for governments, it's the same kind of thing. If they can get your wages up, even though the value of what you're earning is down, you'll pay more taxes on it. Those are the obvious taxes above the inflation taxes. So that means that they would have more money coming in. But that's just regular inflation. The difference between inflation and hyperinflation is simply the speed of the inflation, and that's what we're seeing in South America, in Venezuela, in Argentina, in Brazil.
Right.
That inflation has just exploded because there's only one way to fight deflation, and that is with inflation. And at some point, either because there was some event that they couldn't overcome, or they were just ready for the collapse of the system, that inflation goes very, very rapidly so that those governments get to repay those debts. If you're sitting in Argentinian debts or Venezuelan debt, you know, you can pay it off with curazos or reals that have no value.
Right. Now, as much as I agree with gold and silver and precious metals as being a store of wealth and a way of preserving your wealth, I'm also very pro cryptocurrency.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things about Venezuela and Brazil is they've taken very, very kindly to cryptocurrency to help them in the economic troubles that they're having, because they're dealing with decentralized currencies. They have cheaper electricity costs, so they're mining out there. So, and one thing that I read about in Venezuela was the fact that one Satoshi, which doesn't even equal a penny here in the United States, as far as to the US dollar, is equal to 5 bolivar in Venezuela right now. And that would be a complete sign of this inflation that me and you have spoken about.
Right.
Which I mean, will obviously come here to the United States, but, and this is where like I want to, you know, I know that you're a precious metals person, but I do want to ask you about
Sure.
your thoughts on cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, not the conspiracy stuff, but just the general information out there, because as a form of investment in a way for some people to be able to capitalize and to be able to get some wealth, I believe that buying some of these cryptocurrencies at really low prices, which is where we're seeing market manipulation happening right now, is a great entry level for somebody to be able to preserve their wealth in an additional way to gold and silver. So yeah, I'd like to get like your viewpoints on what you think about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin.
Okay. First of all, if I can't prove something, then I don't talk about it. So much as it's been touted as going around the system, in my opinion, you know, I read the 96 NSA white paper on how to create that cryptocurrency. And I also read the peer review paper done in 97 on smart contracts. So I think that it is by design.
Right.
And I also think that the previous run-up and all of the visibility, and they're creating a new market. I mean, they created a new product. So I guess part of what My question is what is the value, what is the function of cryptocurrencies? I'm very clear on what that is for governments and central banks because they've made that really evident. For governments, it's about the ability to track every single bit of income, every single bit of purchases, so that they can do a lifetime tax on you. And because if once everything is inside of the system, there's no way for you to really, that's not really true, but their thought is that there's no way for you to really hide any wealth. Okay, now gold is a great place because it's outside of the system. So I know that governments want us to go there because of their ability to do lifetime tracking and also to, you know, control what we do more.
Right.
For central banks, what it does is two things. Number one, well, maybe more than two things, but two key things. Number one, it enables them, once cash is eliminated, then there are no longer any restrictions to how low they can push interest rates. So that means negative rates at a deeply discounted level if you're not spending your money fast enough. Because right now, once they make a policy move, it takes 18 months for it to go through the system for them to know whether or not this has worked. Okay, what their policy was has given them the results they were looking at. Once everything is in crypto form, then, I mean, they make a decision, they want you to spend, so they lower rates. If you don't spend, they just lower them more and more and more and more and more. So you watch your principal erode faster and faster and faster. You are very likely to go and spend that to try and lock in or preserve your principal. So having said those two things, you know, I can see what the function is for, you know, for governments and for central bankers. For people, it is a tool of barter, but not really. I mean, you'll have to help me with that one. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, when a cryptocurrency comes out and it gets released on an exchange, it's the people who give it value. And they base it off. They base it off the company, the technologies, and things like this. Now, the thing is, a lot of the companies are speculative right now because they haven't got these technologies out. But you now have more regulation coming into play, which has been holding some people back. SEC, Clayton's come out and he's actually said he's defined what Bitcoin is, and he has defined it as not being a security. He's reiterated what a security is, but has not defined what cryptocurrencies would be put in that. But he's like, if you read the definition, you should understand which ones we placed on that aspect. So basically the market the people, the free market gives the value to it, and I like that aspect. But the other thing is too, is like once we see more of a mainstream adoption, whether the governments were the ones who created this, wanted to be used for this, I think, and I discuss this a lot on my channel, is that the future war in currency is going to be between centralized and decentralized. And as much as any tool can be used for good, it can be used for bad. And so we the people can create technologies that do go around the system. So whether or not Bitcoin was created by the governments for the purposes that you're saying, there is the possibility that we can create something that is resistant to what the government's trying to do, and we, the people, can give it value. And if enough people give something value, like a rock, then that rock is worth value. It has some worth, and that takes people to actually do that and take the power away from the central banks, from the governments. And I agree about precious metals, but I don't see us going back to the old days of carrying around metal coins and things.
I agree with that. I don't think we're going back to 100% backing, but the functionality of cryptocurrencies, I mean, I can see the blockchain technology and tracking and this and that. I can also, again, you know, see how it can be used for not good. but all the cryptocurrencies go through a computer network, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, I mean, you can hold them offline, but if you want to utilize them, unless you meet up with somebody else and you can, change flash drives, if it goes through a computer system and this decentralized and centralized, in theory, it kind of sounds good, but China has a decentralized government. And yet, who controls China?
Right.
Okay, one guy. So,
yeah, I mean, I know what you're saying, and I definitely I don't want to turn this into a debate.
I think it's a good debate, though, actually, because I think people need to hear all of the different sides so they can determine, what feels the most right for them. I would like, for cryptocurrencies personally, other than the Wild West because they bid it up to $20,000, but it has no functionality. I know that that's the direction that we are going in. I just don't think that, I know we're not there yet. And according to the Bank for International Settlements, in their money flower that they did, you could see a small area for private cryptocurrencies. The rest of them, however, are definitely under the purview of the central bank. The biggest area is in the commodity money, so in gold particularly and also in silver, is a much bigger decentralized area. So I will tell you though, I have changed a bit of my personal strategy based on this because I know that's where they're going to take us. It's just that I would like to still see us have choice. I don't want everything online because governments can dictate what happens on the internet.
Yeah, well, they can and they can't. I mean, there's such thing as the dark web. If we have to utilize a back door, there is options for that. And then you got companies that are trying to create new technologies and new ways to be able to have internet, like Nexus, who's in Phoenix, Arizona, that's trying to use satellite technologies and quantum resistance and implement AI into trying to help protect the blockchain. So, I mean, I can definitely see it going both directions, but I think that people who are believing in the things that we believe in are going to help pave a way for people to get through the system, because ultimately
that's a lot of what your work is and a lot of what my work is. It's about maintaining those choices.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And I definitely do not dismiss people investing into gold and silver and precious metals. Right. I think it's important. And speaking of a debate, I mean, I'll talk to Megan and maybe we can schedule something soon and just have an episode that's just strictly talking more about cryptocurrencies and some of the things we can go into a little bit more in depth, because I'm sure a lot of people would be interested in hearing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think people need to hear all sides of it. It's not you're right, I'm right. It's not about that. It's about educated choices and perspective. And we all bring different perspectives to the table. That's the beauty of it.
Do you happen to own any Bitcoin or cryptocurrency?
No. Now, I don't think that that's always going to be true, but for me, it's still the Wild West out there. And part of it too is I was a new stockbroker in 1987 on Black Monday. It was the best day I could have ever been a stockbroker, because I'm going to tell you, when they're, and I think you're probably seeing it in the crypto space right now too, but when there is a major implosion, it doesn't matter. I mean, how much quality you think there is, everything implodes.
Right.
So my preference is to let that dust settle, see who survives it, see what technology survives it, and then go into position. Okay. Because going back to Venezuela, on February 5th, they did an official devaluation of their currency by 99.6%. And 2 days later, they did an official reset of their currency, and gold went up over 2,600 times, and it's continued to go up toward its fundamental value. So in terms of that currency.
Right.
Right. So that's what's going to happen here. I mean, that's just the way it's done. It's not like there are thousands of choices. It's not, there isn't even any other choice.
Right.
That's how a reset is conducted.
They're using Venezuela as a template for the rest.
Well, absolutely, because that's been the global template over 4,800 times. And even though I can't guarantee tomorrow, I don't know, history does have a tendency to repeat itself. So if it's happened this way 100% of the time over 4,800 times, and it's happening this way in different parts of the world right now, yeah, it's probably going to keep happening this way. It's the way they take something that has no value and they do it against something that's all intrinsic value. And I guess, you know, going into the gold versus the crypto space, part of the problem is in demand, right? We've gotten they've trained us to get so far away from what a true market in supply and demand really is that it's kind of hard to see it. And that's why I asked you about the functionality of the cryptocurrencies, because with this level of volatility, it's not even a tool of barter. So what it really is at this juncture is a tool of speculation. And it's used only in one area. Whereas with both gold and silver, it's used across the entire global economic spectrum, which means that there is always demand for the physical gold and silver. Now, not the paper or the digital, because again, that's only used in one area. But the physical, there's always demand because it's used everywhere, manufacturing, in the monetary system, in art, etc.
Okay. So do you want to let people know, like, if they're interested in contacting you at ITM Trading, like what you do and how you can help them with investing in some precious metals?
Oh, well, absolutely. We are, as you indicate, and we do accept Bitcoin, by the way.
Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So we are a full-service physical precious metals brokerage house. So unless you do this inside of an IRA, we're shipping the metal to you. And personally, that's the only way you want to do it right now, is you want to take possession. But what we really do, since I've been studying currencies since '87 and I see these repeatable patterns, I developed a strategy for myself based upon those. And everybody here has been trained in that strategy. And so what we really like to do is customize the strategy to fit you. Because your circumstances, anybody's circumstance is going to be a little different, right?
Right.
Basically, though, if you're working with us and you're executing the strategy, then you're doing exactly the same thing that I'm doing with well, maybe not exactly, just a couple of little tweaks. And the strategy goes through the whole cycle. So you establish your goals, then it's what you buy, where to use them, when to use them, how to use them, the whole 9 yards. And if we do go offline, if the grid goes down and they can't get a hold of us, when you're a client, and you're doing the strategy, you actually get a little booklet so that if, God forbid, something should happen and you can't reach us, you still know how to use them, when to use them, where to use them, etc., to execute the strategy for yourself. And that's what we really love to do. And you can see my work on YouTube, ITM Trading YouTube, or go to our website, itmtrading.com, or give us a call, 888-696-4653. And I have a really fantastic team of precious metals consultants. I think everybody would be happy. They're really bright.
Awesome. I'll definitely have links down below for all that too. And I encourage people to definitely check out your YouTube channel, even if you're not a gold and silver person, to just be able to listen to what Lynette talks about as far as economics, the interviews that she does with other people, and that people interview her. She has all on her website as well and on her YouTube page. So I encourage you guys to check that out. Again, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends this information, this video. Lynette, thank you again for taking the time to do this interview. And I would like to talk about maybe doing a debate about cryptocurrencies and precious metals and things like that.
Absolutely. And if you do what you said you were going to do in the pre-interview, there's somebody else there. We could actually maybe even do a live thing, which would be fun.
Okay. That'd be
I
great.
did a live face-to-face interview with Gerald Salente about a month ago-ish, give or take a little bit.
Right.
And I'm telling you, it was so much fun. It's so different when you're doing a face-to-face, like it live in person. So I'm itching to do one of those.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll say it real quick. I mean, and I'll go into more detail with you, but I've taken a job as the chief marketing officer for Bitcointopia. And
Right.
you can check out the website is bitcointopia.org. And the basic concept, to explain it really simply, is that we're trying to create Tomorrowland in Nevada, out in northern Nevada in Elko County. And we're going to create a town that is basically futuristic and is going to be all encompassing of Bitcoin. So all the businesses and everything, we won't accept US dollar there. It will be only Bitcoin, and we're going to create a government system based off blockchain voting, things like that. So
that sounds very interesting.
It's very interesting. It's a intense undertaking. There's a lot of construction is being done. A lot of economics had to come into play. Like local and state politics and things like that. So it's a lot that I'm learning about, but basically my job is going to be marketing the company, trying to create buzz, working on marketing plans, and hiring marketing firms and things like that in the future. So hopefully I'll be moving out to Vegas. I appreciate it.
Sounds awesome, and you might want to talk to Gerald. He had a good idea with using the blockchain technology for voting, and I could totally get behind that.
Yeah, I mean the blockchain technology is something that's great. I mean we definitely, you can separate that from cryptocurrencies. It's definitely an integral part of cryptocurrency, but the blockchain technology is going to disrupt the world. It's going to change a lot of industries.
Absolutely.
And I'm looking forward to that creative destruction.
Well, we'll have to talk more about this. It sounds really good.
Definitely. Well, thank you again. No, I'll definitely. If I'm in Vegas, I'll be trying to travel out to Phoenix a little bit more frequently, and I'd like to meet you in person for sure.
Absolutely.
So thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. Please like, subscribe, share. I love you all, and remember, be the change by practicing change. Much love.
Be safe. Bye-bye.